whole family household income that they were basing this upon. And this is when we started to get into these more concrete questions, right? Do you think Romani women have the same possibilities as do men in society in areas such as education and employment? And as you can see, the majority said no, right? And then when it came to the issue of economics, everybody agreed that a better economic situation for women would improve the gender scale for women. I'm just giving you a basic rough idea of some of the questions and what kind of information we got. Of course, we don't know yet why they answered this way. What we just have is basically the statistics of what they think. If you look at question 26 here, do you think it is better or easier to work and study in a segregated environment in the classroom or workplace, as an example, where most belong to the same culture and share the same values? And so, if you look at the responses here, the majority said yes. So, what do they mean by this? Well, we go down further because based on the discussions that we had on the internet, a lot of people, when they spoke about sharing values and culture, they meant also division within the Romani groups themselves, that there are differences, okay? They didn't mean just non-Romani society, because you will see this in the questions that come up. Let's see. Oh, this one was, this actually was very interesting. Would you support your partner if he, she chose to educate himself or herself? And the answer was yes. Now, one of the questions here asks the place of men and women. And this is the question. What do you think would work best in a relationship? That the man and woman share responsibilities in the home and outside, for example, in economy and studying, or that the male takes more responsibility in the public sector and the woman in the private sector, right? And what was interesting with this was, because again we filter this to see how many men respond in this way, how many women respond in that way. And the thing of it was, most men answered here, and most women answered here. So it looks like a 50-50 ratio, but it's not actually. The women preferred to say that the private sector, while the men felt that it should be both, right? And why was that? Well, that's what was the next step in this part of the methodology, was to go out and conduct interviews with people about this to see why they responded as they had. Now, of course, we're not going to go out and interview 800 people, right? So the thing was, what we did was we emailed people who answered these questions, and most of the people who did not fit the pattern, that was like that 2% answer, or that 1%, or that 5% response, those are the ones we wanted to interview. Those who didn't answer the same way, to understand why they answered as they had, and then we just kind of randomly email people and ask them if they're willing to participate. And we've got an incredibly large amount of responses saying yes. So I think we ended up with something like 45 informants. By the way, the part of methodologies just to gather this data took, I think, about 8 months. It only took about a month and a half to write this. So you could see what was going on. But the thing was that when we went out there and started interviewing people and posing these questions, we had separate meetings with several women. Sometimes it was in groups, group meetings, right? So I can actually just show you something real quick here so you can get an idea of how this was done. Because it would have been very, very messy for this report if we didn't do it this way. Okay, here we go. Okay. So we kind of like placed these women in groups, right? And this section was on clothing in particular. And what happened was, sometimes the women wanted us to meet and discuss these things as groups. They didn't want to do it individually. They felt more comfortable in having the interviews conducted as groups, right? Rather than individuals. In some cases we had individual interviews, but for the most part it was groups. And so the situation was that when we posed this kind of question about the women's place and the men's place and so on and so forth, I just want to show you one of the discussions here. If I can find it rather quickly. It's also in Swedish. As you can see, some of this discussion going back and forth here, they're talking here about employment and whatnot. And what they were discussing here was that we, in the past, we have something, I belong to what is called the block group made up of Kelderach and Lovari. I don't know how much you know about the various Romani groups. Just stop me if you don't know so much about the various groups that I mentioned, okay? And we have our own kind of justice system, which is called the gris, right? Now, approximately about 50 years ago, it was very common for Romani women to participate in the gris or be gris people themselves, judges. This is virtually unheard of today. It doesn't happen. And a lot of these discussions were about this, was the loss of kind of power within Romani institutions themselves. And this had a lot to do with the economy, because, for example, telling fortunes, a lot has to do with hiding identity, hiding that you're Romani in order to survive, right? So what happened is people would give up fortune telling, as an example, as a means to hide identity. And they would start taking on new trades like the carpet selling in order to survive. And what happens is, because eventually it was men bringing in more and more money into the family instead of the women, they started to lose position. And so we see the same kind of thing actually if we look at, for example, let's say non-Romani society in the United States. There was a study conducted on this, what occurred in actually New England. A company was opened and women were hired, and all of a sudden what happened was they became more independent. Of course, they weren't dependent any longer on men to take care of them.